Welcome everybody to Go Local Live. I'm Josh Fenton, CEO and co-founder. We're not delaying in this beautiful weather here in Providence. We're headed right down to the University of Virginia. We've got Chair of the Political Science Department, Jennifer Lawless. Thank you, Professor, for joining us.
Sure.
Okay, let's go back in the time machine and take a look at last week. I think you made a prediction. Let's take a look back at your prediction. I'm not going to play the whole segment, but what went wrong? You predicted Kamala Harris would be the next president of the United States. She is not going to be the next president of the United States. What went wrong?
I don't know if anything went wrong. I think that what ultimately happened is that it really is about the economy and presidential approval. And Biden has very, very low approval. His approval rating overall was at about 40%. The economy, despite improving on a lot of indicators, didn't resonate that way with voters. And I think the Democrats assumed and thought that such a flawed candidate who was engaged in such a hate-filled campaign and who had been convicted of 34 felonies would allow them to overcome these fundamentals that were working against them. And at the end of the day, that's not what happened.
The Harris campaign appeared to be very confident in the final 72 hours, and according to people who had direct conversations with top people in that organization that I've spoken to, were very confident and thought they were going to win. They thought they were going to hold serve across the country, and they thought they had a better than odds chance of picking up 4 of the 7 swing states. They thought they'd win Pennsylvania. They didn't win a single swing state.
It's right. I've spent quite a bit of time looking at the exit polls and looking at various other analytics. And I think that what the Harris campaign didn't realize was that Donald Trump's ground game was actually quite robust. We had talked quite a bit about how he had farmed it out to Elon Musk, about how it was unclear how organized it was. But if you look at first-time voters, who were a very small segment of the population, they were only, I think, about 8% of the overall electorate, they overwhelmingly went for Trump. And these were voters that he mobilized in red rural areas. And so when we see the comparisons to 2020, in most places, Kamala Harris fared just as well as Joe Biden. Across the swing states, I think there was one county where she outperformed him by at least 3 percentage points. But everywhere else, she basically ran even. Donald Trump outperformed himself compared to 2020 in 69 counties across those states. And so he really did drill down into those red rural areas and turn out all of these people that we just didn't think were ever going to be turnoutable.
Let's come here to Rhode Island. At about 8 o'clock, the polls close. They're pretty quick at doing the tabulations. They have beginning results, and by about 8:45, 9 o'clock, you have all the results. At 8:45, looking at the numbers and looking at Cranston and Warwick, this were those who voted that day. Mail ballots were going to come later in the evening at about midnight. Donald Trump was beating Harris in Cranston and in Warwick. And at the end of the tabulation, at the end of all the results coming in, he doubled his base in Central Falls, a community that's overwhelmingly Hispanic. He went from about 10% to 20%. It's just such a remarkable overperformance in key groups that have been part of sort of the Democratic base that have now shifted over to Trump in significant numbers.
That's true. I would say a couple of things though. First, 95% of Republicans voted for Donald Trump, and 96% of Democrats voted for Kamala Harris. So the first thing to keep in mind here is that there was not party switching here. There was not a lot of people basically adopting the Republican Party affiliation. What we do see is that independents broke for Harris, but by a much smaller margin than they had in 2020 for Joe Biden. And Latino voters, men in particular, did wind up actually supporting Donald Trump. A majority of them supported Donald Trump. So there was some movement, but the movement is really among people that have, not these strong party loyalty. It does mean that moving forward, the Republicans have an additional base of people that they can try and woo. I do think that a lot of this comes down to the economy. A lot of it comes down to uncertainty about what the economy means on a daily basis, on a monthly basis, on a yearly basis. And the Donald Trump campaign was, for better or worse, seen as change from the status quo. The Harris campaign apparently was unable to effectively make the case that the economy we have now is a result of what was inherited post-pandemic because of Donald Trump. That's a hard argument to make. A lot of people also basically have PTSD from the pandemic and don't even want to think about it. And I think the Harris campaign and a lot of Democrats assumed that that was just a given, and it wasn't.
Yeah, but let's go to a reality. If you take a look at the map of the United States, you have the top corner of the East Coast, and you have 3 states on the West Coast that are blue. And the rest of the country, except for Minnesota and Illinois, is completely red. Completely red.
Well, I don't think that's right. There are shades of red, and so if you look at Wisconsin and Michigan, for example.
No, but who won the states? Who won the
Alyssa
states?
Slatkin and Tammy Baldwin also won statewide in Michigan and Wisconsin, and so I don't think that this.
But they're not the president. They're not the president of the United States.
But they won statewide with the same voters in the same constituency, and so I don't think that this election is one in which the lesson learned should necessarily be that the country is far more to the right or far more moderate than the Democrats. I think the lesson learned is that when you're voting for president of the United States, it's really difficult to overcome these economic fundamentals. Senate candidates are able to overcome them in a way that a presidential candidate is not.
Last point, Dave Brooks has a piece today, a New York Times columnist, an elitist, saying, hey, elitist, the rest of America just told you something, the direction of the country. And I was doing some math today. New York Times has 11 million subscribers, and it's not like it's sitting on barbershop tables anymore. It's either you have a digital subscription or you don't. No one else gets to read it. So that's 11 million. The Wall Street Journal has about 3.7 million. And then the Washington Post is now down to about 2 million. So you add those up and you dedupe, and you've got about 13 million people reading the 3 leading newspapers in the country. And the people who read that talk to each other, and they have a sense of reality of where America is. Didn't this election say the rest of the country is trying to tell the East Coast, West Coast elite that they're out of step, that they're not in the same reality? It's 2 different worlds. East Coast and West Coast elites are trying to decide if they're going to go to Europe for the 2nd time in a year, and people who live in Arkansas are trying to figure out how they survive with both parents working, 3 kids, and inflation that, while has leveled off, has driven up prices 20 and 30%.
Look, I think that in 2 years, when we have Senate elections, you and I are going to be having this exact same conversation, but you're going to be saying, well, aren't the Republicans totally out of sync because Donald Trump's tariffs wound up causing major inflation? We're amid a recession and the country is moving to the left. I don't think that that's the message that can be read into it. I think that people are hurting economically. And when you're hurting economically, you vote out the incumbent. And when they're hurting economically as a result of Trump's policies in 2 years, at that point too, they're going to vote out Republican incumbents in the Senate. So I think this was a sweep. There's no question. Donald Trump won all 7 of the battleground states. He won the popular vote. But I think it's not the kind of shellacking that a lot of pundits are, sort of moving toward. We knew the economy was going to be an issue. The question was Kamala Harris going to have to wear it around her neck as an albatross the same way that Joe Biden did? And it turns out the answer is yes. But one other thing I would note here is that when we're looking at Michigan or Wisconsin or Pennsylvania, in all of these states, the margins were more substantial than they were last time around, but these were still relatively close. And if you look at the 10 million Democrats who didn't turn out to vote, that's the difference. That's the difference in the popular vote as well. So some of this was also not that the electorate moved significantly to the right. It's that a decent chunk of the electorate on the Democratic side opted not to go to the polls. Now, some of this was probably regarding Israel and Gaza. And if you're a single issue voter on that issue and you stayed home because you thought that Kamala Harris was too pro-Israel, well, you just helped elect somebody who's completely in bed with Netanyahu. So, I think that people don't like elections to be the lesser of two evils. I think that ultimately, at the end of the day, for some people, that's what they are. And if they stay home, they can wind up with an outcome they don't like.
Was this election for the Democrats fundamentally flawed because Joe Biden started a reelection when he really was not capable of starting a reelection? That his hubris as president was so domineering, so definitive as to what the state of the Democratic Party, and the lack of a Democrat, of a substantive Democrat, to take him on in the primary system, doom the Democrats this campaign?
I think most Democrats looking back would say that if Harris or if another Democratic candidate had had more than 107 days to run the campaign and make an argument, that it might have looked different. But frankly, I don't know that the economy would have looked any different. And I don't know that any Democrat would have run a campaign that was more effective or more energized than hers was. And so we can talk about little mistakes that might have been made here or there, but even if Joe Biden got out of the race 2 years ago, it still would have been the Biden economy that a Democrat was running on. So I don't know. I don't think it would have been. I don't think that it would have been, an obvious win across it at all. Because I do think that it's hard to imagine the last 4 months going much better for the Democrats than they had on the campaign trail. And so if it was going to ultimately come down to inflation, that was going to be the same regardless of whether Biden had gotten out of the race 2 years ago or not.
Let's look forward. On January 20th, Donald Trump will take the oath of office. He has promised to issue I think a mile-high stack of executive orders. He will rescind much of the executive orders that Joe Biden has put forth. He has a commanding margin in the United States Senate. It looks like he'll have control of the House, and if you control the House by one vote, that's pretty good because the rules allow very little interference with the Speaker's agenda. And then the courts, which had gone from being fairly balanced for the last 100 years, are now in many key places appointees that he appointed previously during his term, and of course the Supreme Court is solidly red and leaning towards deregulation and a lot of other conservative agenda points. There's no guardrails for the Trump administration during these certainly first 2 years until the midterms. How do Democrats combat that sort of lack of influence and control?
Well, it's even worse than that because my prediction is that one of the first things the Senate will do is get rid of the filibuster, which is something that the Democrats didn't have the votes or the chutzpah to do and probably should have. Look, over the course of the next few months, there's already talk about all of the judges that Biden is going to try to get through while he still has the Senate on his side. But it's not good. I mean, I think that the fight over the course of the next 2 years is obviously going to focus on the Senate and the House for 2026, but it's also going to focus on state legislatures because as more and more gets deregulated and as more and more devolves to the states, it's going to be up to states to make policy. And we've seen what that's done with abortion. I also think, frankly, that there's a very good chance that one of the checks that the Democrats will have will be Republican overreach, because I think it's very likely, if there is unified party control, that a federal abortion ban will go to Donald Trump's desk and he will sign it, despite everything that he has said. And doing things like that sort of fly in the face of what even Republican voters want. Keep in mind that in states with abortion bans that were on the ballot, between 55 and 58% of voters cast ballots that were on the pro-choice side, despite also voting for Donald Trump. So even in Florida, the 6-week ban wasn't overturned because the threshold was 60%, but 58% of Floridians voted to expand abortion access.
Yeah, but let me raise a doomsday scenario for you. Listen, Donald Trump is inheriting a very strong economy, and if he doesn't move quickly on his tariff policies and just moves forward on some of his other policies, and the tariffs in the works, or it's been delayed, or where analyzing it, and he races into the midterms with a very strong economy and inflation is down very, very low, it's going to be tough for Democrats to say we're a better alternative and flip either the House or the Senate.
Two things. First, I don't think Donald Trump has the discipline to be patient. He also genuinely does not think a tariff is a tax, so we'll see how that works out. But my prediction is that he's going to wreck the economy. But even if he doesn't wreck the economy, midterm elections are less about the economy than other things. So the math for Democrats and the seats that are up in 2026 are far more favorable than they were this time. Now, if Alyssa Slotkin and Tammy Baldwin and probably Jackie Rosen were not able to hold on to their seats, it would have been virtually impossible for the Democrats to flip 6 Senate seats. But
Right.
They can likely flip 3. But they have to work hard and they can't make any mistakes. And they have to also now figure out to the extent that they want to be obstructionists. It was very easy for the Democrats to, criticize the Republicans for obstructing because they didn't want to give the Democrats wins that would help them heading into the 2024 election. The roles are now reversed, and are the Democrats going to engage in that behavior?
Right. It doesn't really come down to Chuck Schumer needs to go guerrilla fighting and hidden in places, putting little mines and those things that shoot up at people, wooden carved things that they're going to have to use. I mean, if Chuck Schumer doesn't slow the Senate down to a crawl, you're going to see the largest recalibration of American policy since probably Roosevelt instilling regulatory structures back in the 1930s.
If there's one person in the Senate I trust to do everything he possibly can, it's Chuck Schumer. And I say that genuinely. So I think the Democrats will put up every single fight they can possibly put up. The question is whether they're able to message around it appropriately. But I have no question that they are going to make the Republicans' lives as difficult as they're able to make them. Now, again, if the Republicans actually do wind up with control of the House, it's harder. But, I think Democrats want Chuck Schumer on that wall.
How's history going to look back at Joe Biden?
He's going to spend the next 4 months trying to shore up his legacy and trying to remind people about all the legislative accomplishments that he got through, the Infrastructure Act, Deficit Reduction Act, and he's going to hope that the 2024 election is not going to be what he's remembered for. But, it's one of these things where if Harris would have won, his legacy would have been, unvarnished, and he would go down as one of the greatest presidents in history. I think it's a lot more unsettled right now.
What should we be looking for in the next few weeks?
So, obviously, control of the House and what that margin is.
Is there any chance the Democrats can win the House?
If we're talking about a 218 to 217 kind of margin, it's possible. Some of these races are really, really close. Some will likely go to recounts and will require, outside absentee ballots and overseas ballots. If I were betting right now, I'm terrible at this, but if I were betting right now, I would say it's likely that the Republicans would probably have control. Like they might wind up with a 219 to 216 kind of margin. But stranger things have happened. Yesterday morning, I would have thought that Alyssa Slotkin and Tammy Baldwin would not have pulled off their victories. So, who knows? So that's one thing. The other thing that I'm looking at is what Donald Trump is going to do in terms of staffing up his administration, because the things he has said on the campaign trail and the things he has said since Tuesday night are pretty worrisome to some Democrats. I mean, basically telling RFK Jr. that he has free range and can do anything he wants except when it comes to oil does not make anybody that believes in vaccines or fluoride in water feel very warm and fuzzy right now. So I'm going to be looking at that and looking at the kinds of people that he's considering for various positions.
But let me just jump in on that one. But Trump is a capitalist and he gets influenced by Wall Street buddies, whether it's Elon Musk's or Schwarzman at Blackstone. Won't the drug friends, the Pfizers, et cetera, begin to influence this idea of doing away with all vaccinations? It's worth hundreds of billions of dollars.
They're not going to do away with all vaccinations, right? Kennedy has already said it's not that he's advocating for banning them. He just doesn't want to make them mandatory.
Not banning them, but no longer mandating them. This is worth billions and billions of dollars to these drug companies that they are mandating.
You think Donald Trump cares? I don't. I mean, we've been here before. So in 2016, heading into Inauguration Day in 2017, there was this general sense that, well, he's a capitalist, he's generally reasonable, he understands how business works, he's not going to do things that take the country off the rails, he's all talk. He wasn't all talk, and it's gotten worse over the course of the last however many years. So I don't think he cares at all about Health and Human Services. I don't think he cares about the CDC, except for his goal of bringing down Fauci and I don't know.
So every Republican presidential candidate since during my lifetime has said they were going to eliminate the Department of Education as one example, or the Department of Energy. Those are the sort of the two standouts. Will we actually see those two departments or departments like that, or the National Labor Relations Board or NOAA or whatever it might be, literally be eliminated?
I don't know if they'll literally be eliminated, but they will be. My bet is that he will appoint cabinet secretaries to them to basically dismantle them. It's a lot easier to do that than to just gut it entirely.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you can tell. I'm not optimistic about the second Trump administration. He has shown us what he wants to do. He has told us what he wants to do. And we've spent 9 years pretending it's not true. It's true. Now, whether he can actually deport all of the people he wants to deport logistically, it's complicated. But is he going to try? And is he going to try to scare, immigrants across the country and, create incentives for them to sort of tell on one another? Of course.
Yeah.
And as far as abortion is concerned, is he going to do anything, even though he says that he thinks it should be left to the states, is he going to do anything to ensure that women have somewhat equal rights regardless of where they live? No. Is he going to do anything to protect the climate, despite what scientists, even a lot of Republican scientists, say? No. And so we know what's going to happen. The question is it going to be in a way that is slow enough that it doesn't lead to more than immediate term damage?
So let me ask you this last question. Do the Democrats move into sort of the Bernie Sanders progressive, get back to focusing on workers' rights, maybe a little less than Bernie Sanders, but more of Elizabeth Warren, very focused on breaking up big corporations, et cetera? Or do they move to sort of the Bill Clinton model of moving to the center, finding sort of common ground with Republicans, and that this argument that most Americans live in the middle and that you need to put together a good candidate who can appeal to people?
I don't think it has to be an either or proposition. I think that you can really appeal to working class voters. I think that you can make the middle class thrive and not sell out when it comes to various social policy issues. I also think that you can secure the border amid that. The Democrats, for whatever reason, have not been able to make a compelling argument that they actually care about illegal immigration and that they do want to not seal the border, but shore up the border and generate more border security. The Republicans have done an excellent job making this into a dichotomy, which is you either favor illegal immigrants crossing the border and committing crime, or you favor a stronger border. And the reality is, and we saw this with Senator Langford's bill that Trump then got other Republicans to kill, Democrats care about a secure border too. So I think on some of those issues, on crime, on immigration, the Democrats have to be more compelling in the language that they use, and not cede the ground to the Republicans to mischaracterize them. But when it comes to workers and other blue collar issues, I think they have a lot of work to do. And that this has been the case over time. I mean, this is an issue that Bernie Sanders really, really put on the agenda in 2016 and thinks is just as problematic now as it was 9 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, Professor Lawless, as always, we greatly appreciate your input. I know you got this one wrong, but I do remember a Senate prediction in which I think you were 10 for 10, and I was like 2 of 10. So
can I trade all of those for this one?
Um, well, you wouldn't have J.D. Vance in the Senate. I went the other way in Ohio back then. So thank you as always. Everybody else, stay tuned. A lot going on in Rhode Island. Post-election, we're now off and running. If you haven't seen Kevin Steakham's comments on the PC basketball team, a must-read today. And also elected officials' reaction to the big Trump win in Rhode Island and what impact that might have. That's up on GoLocal as well. Stay tuned for much more. Stay healthy. Enjoy this remarkable spring weather.